From Longwood in Boston, this is The Pulse, a podcast that dives deep into biotech stories and features biotech leaders. I'm one of your hosts, Yosef Baidi.
I'm your co-host, Fang Xie.
This podcast is brought to you by the Harvard Biotech Club, a student-led Harvard GSAS-affiliated biotech organization which is on a mission to bridge the gap between academia and industry.
Today's guest is Soufiane Aboulhouda. Souf is the co-founder and CEO of Nucleate, a non-profit biotech organization that represents the largest global community of bio-innovators and offers numerous free entrepreneurship programs for academic trainees. Souf is a synthetic biologist by training from Harvard Medical School. He completed his PhD at the George Church Lab in 2024. During his PhD, he served as president of the Harvard Biotech Club. Under his leadership, Biotech Club experienced significant growth, and dozens of new initiatives were launched. In 2018, Souf co-founded Nucleate. Over the past 3 years, Nucleate has expanded from a single chapter at Boston to 35 chapters in 20 regions across US and 15 other countries and regions. By 2023, there are 101 companies incorporated through Nucleate, which have raised a total of $400 million. Welcome to the show, Souf.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, we would say like it's been a while, but we saw you yesterday at Luke Timmerman's 10-year celebration, so it's great to see you so frequently.
Likewise. Wonderful event.
Yeah. So for our first question, we wanted to ask if you could tell us a bit about yourself, for instance, where you're from and what's your background.
Yeah, definitely. Pretty interesting upbringing in the sense that I've had the opportunity to live in a few different places. So I was born in France. My mom's French, dad's Moroccan. And at the age of 7, we relocated to England, where I got to learn English, and then relocated to California at 13, where I got to go to high school and really grow up. Growing up in the Bay Area, went to Cupertino High School, quite an amazing place to be. It's why still today I identify as Californian, despite my diverse background. And then following high school, went to university in Santa Cruz at UCSC. Great experience. Wonderful university, fantastic research institute as well, and that's when I got my first exposure into science, working in a microbiology lab, which then led me to UCSF post my undergraduate, spending 3 years just to hone my research skills, develop a little bit further, and prepare myself for graduate school, really.
Cool. Thanks for telling us more. And then you kind of talked a little bit about getting interested in research during undergrad and getting some experience post-undergrad. So I wanted to know a little bit in terms of different careers in science. What was your motivation for specifically pursuing a PhD to get more into science, and maybe telling us a little bit more about, of all the scientific areas, why specifically you're interested in biomedical research?
Definitely. I mean, I think the common unifying theme is a lot of serendipity along the way. I didn't even know that research was a thing that happened within universities. Up until my junior year, I was doing very well in my organic chemistry class, and a professor called me into her office because I was at the top of the class, and she asked me if I'd ever considered doing undergraduate research, to which I said, what? And then she sat down, took the time, explained to me that professors do quite a bit more than just teach your classes. She showed me how lab websites work, told me to come back the following week with a list of 20 classes, 20 labs that I thought was interesting, and she would help me get my first research experience. And so that really got me started, and from there just loved the science, loved the bench. I knew that that's what I wanted to pursue farther. And then I had the opportunity through a diversity grant, UC Leeds specifically, and the UCSC Career and Diversity Office to spend the summer somewhere else. And so that's where I went to San Francisco to work at UCSF. And that's where, for the first time, I got to see how an R1 research institute operated, and I knew that that's where I wanted to be. And then coming out of my undergraduate, having gotten engaged in research a little bit late, I knew that I just wasn't competitive for those kinds of PhD programs just yet, and that I could really benefit from a few years fully immersed, full-time, really honing my research skills and scientific thinking capabilities so that I could have the opportunity to go to a place like UCSF or Stanford or otherwise. Later realizing that there were some phenomenal schools on the East Coast as well. My boss had trained with Dave Bartel at the Whitehead, really influenced me and pushed me, slightly coerced, to apply to the East Coast schools. And that's how I found myself out here on the East Coast for my interview.
Cool. Well, yeah. And so you ended up coming to Harvard, and like we mentioned, you joined George Church's lab. So kind of what led you to join George's lab, and could you tell us a little bit more about your experience and what you learned from being in his lab?
Yeah, serendipity story number 2. So during interview weekend, one of the evenings, you have the opportunity to go to the Natural Science Museum. Super awesome gathering, wonderful art. Waiting to get in line into the museum was this giant standing next to me. If anyone's ever seen George, he's about 6'6" or something around there. And he started to talk to me, and I had no idea who he was, what he had contributed to science. But we connected, just both talking about science and life. And during that conversation in line waiting to get into the museum, George invited me to come rotate in his lab. So when I went home, looked him up, I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool, actually. And on day one, once I arrived, I knew that was my first rotation. Loved it right away. And in my first engagement with George, thinking about what I wanted to work on my thesis, I told him I thought I wanted to do CRISPR technology development, to which he said, why don't you work on something exciting?
Yeah, I think we could
2012.
we could relate to that too. We just had our last podcast interview with George Church as well,
Cool.
and it was fascinating conversation. So I can imagine as an incoming graduate student being really convinced to want to rotate with him after talking to him.
Definitely, and this was 2016, mind you. You know, the CRISPR companies had just barely gotten started. The field was at a very early stage, but you know, it gives you an inside glimpse into how George thinks as a scientist and as an innovator, really thinking about what the next wave of science is going to look like. And we've taken a lot of those principles moving forward.
And during your time in graduate school, you were co-president of the Biotech Club, and many HBC members, alumni who worked with you, were very impressed by your efforts. And many of them have credited you as one of the most pivotal figures in the club's 25-year history. So what led you to becoming involved with the club, and how did you grow the club?
Definitely. So serendipity story number 3. A lot of obliviousness and luck along the way that all connected. But during my time in the lab, in one of the very first lab meetings that I ever went to, turned out not to be a lab meeting at all, but instead a postdoc that day, Jonathan Scheinman, now CEO of Fit Biomics, was giving a practice pitch before going out and speaking with investors. And so much in the same way that I had no idea professors used to run research labs, I also didn't know that companies came from academic labs. Right after that meeting, which was really cool, John was sequencing the microbiome of world elite athletes, and from there he had isolated a strain that was unique to Olympic runners, which I thought was just the coolest thing ever. Went up to George, went up to John, was like, what on earth is going on here? What are all these words? Milestones, de-risking, proof of concept, use of proceeds, milestones, risk. I'd never seen anything of the sorts, coming from a background in basic biology, studying mechanisms of translation regulation at UCSF. And George being George, for anyone who's had the privilege of getting to know him, is very nice, very humble, and very down to earth. And so he was very gracious with his time, and that's another trend in my trajectory that I've really benefited from. And in that time and in future meetings, he shared about the culture in his lab, the strategies that individuals were taking to advance innovation forward, the emerging trend that he was seeing around company formation from academic projects, and that he predicted that this was going to be a trend that would continue to increase, while at the same time continuing to be quite prolific in training his lab for academic careers as well, and pumping out PIs left and right, and just really reinforcing that the lab was about pursuing what you're most interested and passionate about. There was no right or wrong answer, but for those who were interested in entrepreneurship, here's what they did, and here's what the lab offered for them to create those opportunities for them. And so from there, I got the startup bug, so to speak. I knew that that's what I wanted to do in some form or shape, yet I knew nothing about it. And that's where I went to Google, pre-ChatGPT days, tried to figure out if there was some resources on campus. I figured, it's Harvard after all, there must be something here. And that's when I came across the Harvard Biotech Club. Got involved first through the career fair that's organized on an annual basis. And I started off after some general engagements, had the opportunity to become the director of communications. And in that role, I got to see everything, all of the inbound emails, all of the communication that was happening. I had an understanding of all the programs that were being operated. And in that process, my mind just started to get going with new ideas, with areas in which the club could grow. And then within about a year, quite lucky that the two co-presidents at the time were both graduating, and that created a vacancy in the role, which I had the opportunity to take over very early on in my PhD career to become one of HBC's co-presidents.
It's cool to hear. I think me and Fung can relate too, because we were both part of the communications team at the time. You being actually one of the directors, and I think it's exactly like you said. You hear everything about these events, and even if you're not going, you're like, "Wow, this is happening."
It's not the most rewarding work at times, but I think for those who want to build, it's a great scope into the organization.
Yeah.
Cool. So it kind of sounds like it was kind of a defining moment in your PhD, kind of learning more about the biotech club. I don't know if this and kind of your experience in lab have kind of effects on your interest after your PhD or career interest in general.
Yeah, it definitely was. And again, I would just mark it all down to that seminal moment in time, core memory, if you will, of John presenting, and just that light bulb moment going off in my head. And then having the opportunity to step in as its co-president was really quite exciting, because it affords you tremendous opportunity in terms of exploring, experimenting, building things. And that was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, for records, how many members did you have? I mean, back then when you were the president of the Biotech Club.
That question's always a little difficult to answer, because you never quite know how up to date your records were. I think one of the things that I did as director of communications was to shift our frameworks over from the standard internal Harvard systems, which were a little clunky, very outdated, to bringing in more modern tools like MailChimp, like Typeform. Data was the message at the time. We didn't have that internal data about our members, about our impact, the metrics, engagements. We were operating in the dark. And so when we ported over to that, the mailing list was at about 600 active members. And that's where I went to the way back when machine. Club had a 20-year history. Got to hear from Peter Kolczynski a few sessions ago. I was like, wait a minute, the club used to have like 5,000, 6,000 members. Why are we only at 600 right now? And so it became very clear that for us to be successful as an organization, we were going to have to regrow our membership base, and we grew it back to around 5,000, 6,000 within a very short period of time.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. When you said like 500, 600, I was like, no way, because I feel like now it's gotten so large, we take for granted how we got to that point. Cool. And then I know you're also known as being one of the co-founders of Nucleate. So would you like to share a little bit about the backstory of how you came up with the idea for Nucleate?
Definitely. And I think, there were a lot of preceding events that led to this. Coming into the presidency at HBC, I was cognizant that I knew very little about the space and that I was going to need support. So I said to myself, who better to get support from than from the guy who founded this thing? Again, I went to Google. I was like, oh, who's Peter Kolczynski? Seems to be doing pretty well in life. RA Capital looks like a really cool firm. That's the guy I want to talk to. And so after a few attempts, story for another day, I finally managed to get through to Peter, who was also incredibly gracious with his time. And we sat down and I asked them a series of questions about the club, about its history, its origins. Why did you start this thing? What purpose was it serving? What were the underlying frameworks that you had developed to advance that educational mission, to train graduate students for careers in life sciences? How was it that you were able to get beyond the standard lectures, sit down, passive absorption of information to build these active, dynamic programs, which I thought was quite unique to the organization and very different to what everyone else was doing. Not that there's anything wrong with a fantastic lecture. We all love those opportunities where we can sit down and just soak that information in from the masters of our space. But it seemed that HBC was organizing at a slightly different level. And that all came from, I think, some of those founding principles that Peter had developed. And from that meeting, we asked ourselves the fundamental question of what still holds true 20 years later for the graduate student and postdoc base as it relates to bridging the gap between academia and industry. For the most part, biotech's no longer considered as the dark side. So we didn't have to hide in the basements like Peter did to organize our lectures and do things. And then we also asked, what's changed? So equally important to what has remained the same, or vice versa, whatever order I presented it in. We asked those two fundamental questions. What's different and what has changed? And to answer that what's different question, well, it was another thing that I couldn't answer myself. I knew what I was interested in. I knew what the team around me was interested in. But to answer that, went out there and spoke with dozens, hundreds of individuals in the community to understand, what are your career interests? What do you think that the bottlenecks are in achieving that? What are your unmet needs? And from engaging in so many conversations, you can start to pick up patterns. And from those patterns, we built programs. And so during my tenure, we grew the number of programs from 10 to 20. Again, coming into a super privileged position. As you can imagine, for a 20-year organization, it goes through its ups and downs. And I was coming back into the co-presidency right on the uptick. If you think about an exponential curve, that's what it looked like for me. The organization under Kelly and Becca had just rebranded. Thank you, Kelly's boyfriend, for doing that design work for the organization. It looked clean. It looked polished. We had a logo. I felt that we had a brand. It was something that we could work with. We had a slate of programs that were working very, very well. And again, I came in with a bunch of existing ideas from my time as director of comms, further inspired through my conversations with Peter. And so beyond Activate Bio, now Nucleate, we also created a whole breadth of programs that remain to this day very exciting. The public investment course, crossover, engaged, info sessions, we standardized, we categorized, we structured, we grew. And we offered our stuff to more than just the Harvard community. It always pissed me off that it was just this ivory tower. You had to be a Harvard student in order to access our offers. No, if you wanted to learn about biotech, we had those opportunities for you. But perhaps the most striking observation in all of this was the number of scientists who were telling me that they felt that they had a body of research that had potential beyond the bench in the form of a company. Yet they didn't have the skills, the network, the education, the resources to advance those ideas and research projects forward. And as a result, I kept hearing, I think this is cool, but I don't know where to go. I'm going to leave this behind and go take a job in industry instead. So that was the first observation. And the second was that people were saying the community felt very siloed. Within HMS, there wasn't much communication, yet alone collaboration. With HBS, of course, now we have the Life Sciences MS-MBA program, which is phenomenal. And there was also not much interaction with the hospitals. So that bridge between the science community, the business community, and the clinical community just wasn't there, let alone that interconnection between academia and industry in itself. So that was on one side, which prompted me to ask, why is this? We are in one of the most resource-rich ecosystems in the world. Why is it that scientists and junior faculty, for that matter, felt that they didn't have the resources available to them to start companies? And that's when I started to meet with the ecosystem, the transfer offices, the universities, to really understand where the opportunity exists and where we could build a structured, functional educational program to really complement and help support the university and its researchers.
Yeah, definitely. I think you identified the gap, right? That's we still use the mission for our motto for the club is to bridge the gap between academia and industry. Yeah, we really appreciate that Nucleate, and also when you were in the club, a lot of like functions and initiatives really democratize all these different like directions and opportunities. Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think for Nucleate, we have definitely a lot of questions. Could you share why that's question? That's why you name it the organization, the Nucleate, and people will may be interested. Yeah.
Definitely, and we've undergone a rebranding as well. But after those observations, I had the opportunity to meet Marissa Pettit, who was a student at HBS. And at the same time, we were starting to increasingly collaborate with MassBio, specifically Lucy Rochard, who at the time was driving their innovation efforts, is now at Sanofi. We still talk to this day. And the ideas had been bubbling up to create a Harvard program for company formation. Again, at the time, HBC already had its entrepreneurship course. It already had the incubator that had been running for many, many years. And so we felt that there was a need for a program that kind of filled the other gap, and specifically for scientists to explore the formation potential around their companies, which complemented the incubator working with Carl Novina very, very well, where students could come in and really dive deep into a single company. We asked, what about all the other companies? And so that's how it all started coming together. Marissa and I sat down. We asked ourselves, what's out there? Where do we feel like that we could do better? And that's where we started designing the program. And again, this isn't something we did by ourselves. We went out there and had dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations with VCs, with industry individuals, with founders. Tell us everything you know about building a company. And when you ask that question 10, 20, 30 times, you start to pick up on patterns. And once you pick up on the patterns, you can start to follow up on that. One thing that came up over and over again was understanding your technical risk profile, or your landscape, or your operations plan, fundraising strategy, regulatory strategy. And then from there, you can dive in. And so what we ended up doing was building a curriculum around those insights that we got from all of those leaders. And we wanted to supplement that with experienced support. So innovators that would go through the program wouldn't work by themselves. We would combine scientists with business students, and that core team would also work with a resident physician in order to unify the business, science, clinical domains. By nature of all being trainees, we knew that we needed strong mentorship. In its early days, our mentorship program in Activate was powered through MassBio, which was wonderful, which now allowed us the team formation phase 1, the mentorship phase 2, the workshop phase 3, the networking and community engagements phase 4, which all culminated in the presentation of the final project. And so as we thought about that, Marissa actually came up with the name Activate, because what we figured that we were doing was lowering the activation energy of starting companies. We wanted to be a catalyst in that process, but name catalyst was already being taken by a variety of other places, and we felt that activation energy was a little bit more relevant to what we were doing. Less effort to get to your value inflection point. So Activate worked great as a name for a few years, and we can get into the story of why we changed it as we talk about the expansion story.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much. And I think we want to kind of go back to the little anecdote of talking to Peter Kolchinsky, because we had talked to Peter for our debut podcast, and he had mentioned kind of having the Biotech Club be accessible for everyone, and how initially it was just an email to sign up, which it kind of is to this day, just your name and email.
Yeah.
And I think
cold email.
Yeah. And starting Nucleate to be like that as well, and also with the expansion being in different locations to make it more accessible for people to go to different events. So
really important. The accessibility piece is huge, and that's a theme that I think we've propagated forward. Again, stemming from that work that Peter did, and And Peter continued to share his insights at every step of the way, challenging assumptions, providing critical feedback in terms of what we were building, highlighting areas that just weren't good enough. One of the sayings that will stick with me, still drives me to this day, was after the first year, had shown Peter what we had built. He was like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I could do the same thing in my office in half an afternoon. And then that really drove us, I think, to go back to the drawing board, really evaluate what we had done and just improve it. And that has just instilled this mentality and value of just improvement at all costs and unapologetic excellence for the organization that just comes from those conversations with Peter. And it wouldn't just be an off-the-cuff comment like that. That was reflective of hours-long conversation in which Peter has an uncanny ability to connect things to one another, and a super sharp, intuitive mind that's detail-oriented. And I remember we went through the website line by line. Why did you write this? Why is it important? What do you mean? And that really pushes you to challenge your assumptions around what you had done and identify areas where you can just be much better.
It's cool, yeah. So I guess at that point you're kind of challenged, and now we know Nucleate is this large organization, expanded to other states and countries even. So did you have the idea that it becomes such a large organization and in just a few years?
Well, we knew that we were going to grow. At first we thought and had planned for growth within Boston. Because while Peter Kolczynski is one of our founding advisors and one of the most seminal ones, we also had the privilege of working incredibly closely with Peter Barrett, a fellow at HBS, as well as a partner at Atlas Venture, and of course with George, to kind of build that trio of knowledge was really quite cool. So we knew that we wanted to expand it from Harvard to MIT. During that time, Marissa graduated, went to Genentech. That's when Sophia Guerra came in, also a co-founder of the organization. And then shortly after, Oliver Dodd, also a Harvard BBS graduate student, had just joined. He joined the Church Lab. He joined the team, also a co-founder of the organization. And in year 2, the pandemic hit. And that forced us to switch to a virtual format mid-program. And so in year 3, the conversation was, do we run this again virtually, or do we wait this thing out? And with no end in sight, we decided to run virtually. And in that process came to the realization that we were all of a sudden interconnected with one another. Zoom is a wonderful tool, even though most tend to be a little burnt out by it, but it's really efficient, and it's got incredible connectivity. And once that insight came, which by the way was also when I was starting to get bored with the program a little bit. My mind likes to be in a million places at once, always doing new things. We had done it 2 years. We knew that it was working because teams were starting to raise their seed capital. And my goal was to go into venture capital. And I felt that I had developed those skill sets sufficiently so that I could now just immerse myself fully in venture fellowships. But when the light bulb moment came up, discussion as a broader group that we could consider expansion, my interest started to come back in. And that's when we tapped Oliver and Matt Lanchantin to lead the Boston chapter so that I could go focus on the expansion piece of things. And so I focused on our geographic expansion, and Sophia Guerra focused on our domain expansion. And that's when we launched our eco program, our planetary health program, to accompany the bio program on human health. And the expansion was facilitated because in years past, I, as co-president, had started to develop relationships with other student biotech clubs across the country, notably in New York, as well as in the Bay Area through Stanford's group. And those were the original targets for our expansion, and started to go out, engage with others. Michael Rechin out of New York immediately committed to building a New York chapter, said he was all in, and that really tipped the domino, got things going. The Bay Area through Tobias Schmid came in shortly after. And then through that, the momentum started to create. People were coming to me, hey, you should meet X student, you should meet Y student. They're my friend in San Diego, my friend in LA, different cities, Philadelphia. And one by one, in the early days, had to work very, very hard to convince these individuals to do this as a unified effort. What I didn't mention is a few years prior, as co-president, I had tried to start a national coalition of biotech clubs. And it just didn't work because at the end of the day, everyone's motivated by their own primary interest, as there should be, and as is their responsibility. And so the coalition always came second. And with Nucleate, I knew that if we drove things through a unified, centralized effort, we could have that cohesion and we could build those sustainability metrics in. That needed a lot of convincing. People don't like to be told what to do generally. They certainly don't like to be told what to do by Harvard students, not when you're at some of the other top universities in the world. And so one by one, it just got a little bit easier by easier. More people started to come into the loop. And at the beginning, the group had said, yeah, we can expand, but no more than 3. And the next thing I know, I report back with a set of 8 cities that we're going to operate in. Super excited, just looking at like stares of concern and in reflection. And that's when we started to realize that this thing was no longer feasible to operate out of the Harvard Biotech Club for a variety of reasons. And so we formally spun out Activate, what was then called Activate, as its own independent 501c3 headquartered here in Massachusetts, and went on our way with 8 different cities, which received some wonderful press from some great outlets. And that kind of coverage created a really strong momentum and gravity of the organization.
It's really cool. And I feel like you kind of talked about like big cities forming, but I think the cool part about Nucleate is you're getting areas in other parts of the country, like Midwest, South, that, you know, we historically don't think of like biotech hubs, and expanded to like Australia, for instance. It's like basically every continent besides Antarctica at this point.
Definitely. Yeah. And that was the trigger that happened. I think our expansion effort in that moment, and by the way, I have to credit so much of this to Michael Retchin, who was the first individual I recruited to my executive team with the primary mandate of driving expansion. And Michael was just as hungry as I was, and had just as high a risk tolerance as I can, or a disregard for operational viability, some might say. But, you know, I think when you're that motivated, you find ways to make these things work. And what we saw happen once we announced our incorporation and expansion to 8 cities, the expansion effort stopped being an outbound effort and became an inbound request. We started to get emails from cities we'd never even thought of. Can you bring Nucleate to our region? This would come from students, it would come from universities, industry individuals, foundations. And that's when we started to get a little bit more serious about how we considered our expansion. We created a pretty detailed set of criteria in which we used to evaluate the viability of each city. And that allowed us to prioritize, define our strategy, which allowed us to grow from 8 to 18. And after an amount of time, you start to have the canonical biotech hubs, if you will, and the emerging ones very well covered. And that's where we started to think about what is the broader potential here, because certainly there's a good degree of naivety in thinking that it is easy to start. Well, it's hard to start a biotech company anywhere, but it's much, much harder if you're in an ecosystem that is emerging. Yet the trainee base there is just as exceptional. There are amazing people everywhere, smart people everywhere, and that's where we come up with the saying that talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And so much like we did with HBC, we started to grow out a broader slate of educational programs. This is now called our Professional Advancement and Training Hub. And this is where we run courses, lecture series, workshops, etc., so that we could cater to the emerging generation in different cities. And that's how we've been able to successively grow in a responsible manner.
Yeah, it's phenomenon. Yeah. For the listener who might not know the background, the story of a Nucleate. And Nucleate is really a phenomenon students organization. And I have to say, only like 99% of Nucleate are the volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just the few people as the housekeeping staff. So it's totally like beyond belief. And here, I think we question is like, we know you graduated last year from the Church Lab, and recently you started up as a full-time CEO of the Nucleate. So could you please share with us your future plans for this organization? Yeah.
Definitely. And happy to get into the backstory a little bit about why we decided to jump in full-time. You know, mentioned his name earlier as a co-founder of the organization, but Oliver was one of the individuals, per an introduction through Tony Kalesa, Pillar actually, so thank you, Tony, that was all in from the very beginning as well, including others, Sammy Sassone, Zach, here, many others who we won't have time to get into the full story today, but Oliver joined the Church Lab, and we worked on the same project in the lab, this idea that we could use functional genomics to identify genes that were promoting altered cellular trafficking patterns, with the goal of identifying homing genes, most notably cell surface expressed receptors that could enhance solid tumor homing and increase the penetration as a means of improving outcomes for engineered T-cell therapies in those domains. And so we thought about starting a company ourselves around this work, being very fortunate to be at the Wyss Institute, where they have the resources to fund those high-risk projects successively, step by step, de-risking it at each step. So on the back end of our PhDs, we asked ourselves the question, what should we do? Do we try to start this cell homing company? Or is there an opportunity that exists within Nucleate for us to come in a full-time capacity? As well as the other career considerations that we were making, joining a venture capital firm, a group like RA Capital or Atlas, if we were able to make it through the interview process at least, or go into business development. And so we knew that Nucleate was a really exciting opportunity. We felt that we had only scratched the tip of the surface in terms of the organization's potential. We knew that it would benefit from increasing professionalization and a growing full-time staff. At that time, we already had 2 full-time employees, growing to 3, currently at 5. Anticipate that we'll be at 8 fairly soon. But the goal had always been to try and start our own company. And, took some attempts with that. We had the opportunity to work with North Pond Labs while we were at the Wyss. But as the project came together, and perhaps most notably during the thesis writing phase, where you're assembling all of your data, and unlike at times as an entrepreneur, when you're writing the thesis, you have to be objective about your data. Data is data. A good entrepreneur does that as well. But, you tend to want to show your best data. And oftentimes you've got one slide that shows that one experiment that you've done that shows all of the promise. And there's like hundreds of experiments in the background that you often don't hear the story about unless you go into deep diligence. And so in looking at that, we certainly had some promising data, but looking at it objectively, we just felt that the technical risk profile was far too high. The project hadn't really met its objectives as it related to enabling company formation, certainly met the objectives as to completing a thesis and putting together a publication. We just felt that we hadn't done enough, too early, so to speak. We had some idea about what the next technical roadmap steps would look like, but it seemed that it would be very expensive to get there, and it would take a lot of time. Before we get into the biological risk profile, aka showing that enhancing cell homing does indeed lead to enhanced therapeutic effects. We hadn't done those studies ourselves. We had really focused on the technology development of the program. And then lastly, we really thought that the market risk was a little bit too high as well. The value capture opportunities just weren't there because cell homing as a biology is a bolt-on. It's in addition to something like your CAR T receptor, that's your therapeutic vector, and as a result of that, couldn't really draw a clear line towards value creation. And when you put all of that together, it became clear that this was the thing that we were preaching from the very beginning at Nucleate, which is take a look at your science objectively. This may be a cool publication, but that does not mean that it's a viable company. And we found ourselves in that exact same situation. And so we had to, follow our own preaching. And so that's where we decided to go into Nucleate full-time. It wasn't a new conversation. We had been talking about this as a board for years, what the upcoming needs would look like for the organization, how we would ourselves be around for 20 years, just like HBC did. And so when we became available to be the executives of the organization, it was just a natural fit, and we jumped right in.
That's really cool. And I imagine now as your full-time job, you and Oliver, you guys have a lot of plans for what you could do because you guys already accomplished so much the past couple of years, but could you share a little bit more about what do you your ambitions or kind of goals for Nucleate for the next couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the short term, especially for this year, we're really thinking about sustainability and stability. Strengthening our partnerships, increasing the efficiency of our operational pipelines, and then to your question, that leads into asking ourselves, what does our 5-year strategic roadmap look like? Where do we want Nucleate to go? What do we want it to do? And a big part of that answer is really quite simple. It's just getting much better at the things that we already do. So increase the maturity and sophistication of the work that we do to help facilitate company formation. Get better at sourcing, get better at diligencing, get better at supporting innovators, grow our network to increase the efficiency of fundraising, help facilitate partnerships with other pharma groups, and just be there for these innovators to make their process much more streamlined. And then continue to expand our career development services so that we can serve a broader population. And one of the things that we've seen over the years is the dynamic aspect of the community through the events that we do, and so really kind of stabilizing that. And then beyond that, we'll see. I think we have some exciting ideas in mind in terms of where the organization is going to go and how it may evolve, but none of that stuff will come to fruition unless we really dedicate time to strengthening its foundations first.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're excited to hear when those come out, since you obviously can't talk too much about it, since it's still early stages. So since you had just finished graduate school, we're wondering, you have a lot of experience with HBC and now starting Nucleate. So what kind of advice could you give for folks in their PhD who want to start an impactful organization such as Nucleate?
Well, the first advice, and this will reflect one of the things Peter once said to me, is why start something new when you can join the Harvard Biotech Club? We already have what you need. So, first and foremost, building an organization from scratch is incredibly rewarding and incredibly exciting, but it's a lot of work. And so you really need to ask yourself, what are your goals and what are your needs? And if those are well served by an existing entity, like the Harvard Biotech Club or like Nucleate, find a meaningful role within that organization. And find a role that's also conducive to balancing your academic priorities. And that's something that we always reiterate in the organization. Because that's your primary goal, and it can be so exciting to work in organizations like HBC and like Nucleate. And as a result of that, it can be so easy to say, I'm going to do this experiment tomorrow. And tomorrow comes, and you've got this new exciting thing that comes up. Whether it's running the program or meeting someone like Peter, it's really easy to kick the ball down the road. And so keep that academic progress at the center of mind. See what's out there, because beyond those two organizations, there are a lot of other tremendous groups on campus, off campus, in the nonprofit space, in the for-profit space nowadays. And this is quite different from when I joined as a graduate student. There are so many internships and fellowships that one can do, part-time, full-time, that really give you that in-depth experience, introductory experience into industry. I myself did an internship at RA Capital, and that to this day continues to shape the way that I think about the world in a connected, non-linear manner, aka, in many ways how they build their maps. And then if after all of that, the one thing that you want to do just doesn't exist out there, where you're gonna have to build it yourself, and that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, and find great people around you who want to build with you. Find great people who are experts in the space that can guide you along the way, and help stop you from making the mistakes, which you're going to make anyways, but at least you learn from those, and can take that advice in.
Sounds great. Yeah, I think that was kind of similar advice we got from Peter, telling us about why he started the biotech club and that there was nothing available for grad students at the time. So
Yeah.
I think, it's crazy to think now there's so much resources now, but there's always some kind of niche or area where there isn't anything, and you have to identify it.
Yeah.
But last year, it was probably the first time I met you, Souf, and it was we were working with you on an event that you were organizing with Luke Timmerman called Bridging the Gap. And for those who don't know, this was an event you were organizing to raise money for the Timmerman Traverse for Damien Runyon. So could you just explain for people who are not familiar kind of what the Traverse is, the connection to Damien Runyon, and how did you go about creating this huge event, since we just helped a little bit, but it sounded like you were doing so much to get this going.
Definitely. So a couple years ago, I get a random email from Luke Timmerman, asking if I was interested in going to Mount Kilimanjaro. And my ADHD kicked right in. I was like, oh, shiny, cool, exciting thing. I was like, I'm in, right away, no thoughts about it. And I'd heard about it before, of course. I knew that really cool other biotech people got engaged. The general premise of the Traverse is an annual activity organized by Luke Timmerman. For those not familiar, Luke actually just celebrated his 10th year anniversary yesterday at Al Nilam. Wonderful individual and an incredible reporter. And also does incredible good for society. So once a year, he assembles a group of 20 individuals who commit to going to summit Kilimanjaro or trekking to Everest Base Camp. And in order to do so, each individual is responsible for raising $50,000. Collectively, the goal tends to be $1 million, to which Luke allocates to an organization of his choice. He's supported the Fred Hutch in the past, and the campaign that I joined was in support of the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation. He also has smaller campaigns for Life Science Cares, and these things get phenomenal community support. And as I've gotten to learn about Damon Runyon, I've just grown incredibly impressed with the work that they do to support scientists across academic ecosystems. And so in that process, I thought to myself, when Luke said, you got to raise 50K, yeah, no problem. We've done it at HBC. We doubled the budget when we were there. Nucleate, also depends on sponsorships as an organization. But this was a little bit different. The moment that it starts, it's like, oh, wow, it's actually really hard to ask people for money. And most of the individuals on the campaign tend to be much more experienced. Their Rolodex, let's say, is a little bit deeper and a little bit more substantiated with time as well. And as a result of that, I looked at the strategies that were being taken, and I just didn't feel that I had the kind of network that I could reach out to and say, hey, can you give me $5,000, $10,000, $25,000? And I also needed to raise for Nucleate. And so I didn't want to have two competing fundraising efforts going on. So that's when we decided to do an event instead. And in 2019, actually, in celebration of the Harvard Biotech Club's 20th year anniversary, is when we decided to do a symposium that we called Bridging the Gap. Really cool conference involving people like Peter, George Daly, David Altshuler, George Church, Sangeeta Bhatia, Parthi Sabeti, some really cool professors. And that symposium was incredibly well received by the community, yet we hadn't organized it again, in part because it was quite a large operational lift. And so here I was in the midst of writing my thesis, being on the hook for $50,000 and putting together an event. And so we decided to do Bridging the Gap again in partnership with the Harvard Biotech Club and Damon Runyon, as well as the broader support of others. And that's how the event ended up coming together, featuring some wonderful speakers like John Maragnore and Peter Barrett, Vicky Sato, Abby Selnecker. Ended up being a wonderful gathering that in total ended up raising $116,000 for the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation. So that's the backstory. Fantastic. And all a means to an end that became more of a passion in recent years, as I remain really interested in supporting Damon Runyon, continuing to do Bridging the Gap as an event. And now next month I get to go to Everest, which I'm trying to get in shape for.
Yeah, I'm sure you could just start training now. Climbing Mount Everest is not that hard of a deal, right?
Base camp.
Yeah.
And when I got into one of the early calls with the group, we're going around the table. Everyone was sharing how they were training, and I was like, oh well, I'm 33. I'm young. I think I should be good just showing up, right? I can squat X amount. Getting a look of shock from Luke and from Eric Murphy, and so in the past month I've been going on a little bit more hikes, do my daily stir stepper, try to get my legs under me.
Yeah, I guess they talked a little bit about the event yesterday at Luke's event. It sounds like really fun, so I'm sure you'll do great.
Yeah, definitely. Very excited and looking forward to it. And then hopefully that leads to more Bridging the Gap events, which I think touches on such a critical theme of the bottlenecks, the gaps that relate between academia and industry, what we can do to increasingly support scientists, innovators in the space, and to get those perspectives from the ecosystem's very best.
Yeah, I think that goes into the next question. So besides training to hike Mount Everest, like what other hobbies outside of work do you have at this point?
Yes.
Good question. There are a few things that keep me very well grounded. My dog and hanging out with my girlfriend Cynthia is definitely a huge one. We love to be outdoors generally, so in the summer going to the beaches, hanging out, going on hikes, traveling as often as we can, something that's really rewarding. Also quite cool in that context that I get to travel for work now to all of these incredible new cities. I was in Copenhagen last year, in Paris the year before, and in London. And not only do you get to see these amazing cities, but you get to interact with just these incredible individuals, scientists, innovators, students, industry leaders, and stuff. So, the dog traveling is a big one. I love to cook. It's one of the things I can do to take my mind off of things. I always think to myself that had I not gone into science, I definitely would have pursued a professional career in food.
What type of food?
That's a good question. When I was an undergraduate, I had the opportunity to live in Rome for 6 months. At the same time, I grew up with a French mom and a Moroccan dad, and so it was always around a culture of food. We ate around the dinner table every single night, and so really the food that I cook is at the intersection of those three cultures. In the summer, when the produce is good, never a problem in California, but here you have to be a little bit more deliberate. Tends to be a little bit more on the Italian side, produce forward, simple dishes,
you can call fusion.
Highlighting the technique. And then in the winter, a little colder, I switch a little bit more to my French side, heavy sauces, a lot of soups and things like that. But that's something that I love to do, that post-PhD I'm just trying to do a lot more of, because the end was definitely a sprint, which left very, very little time for hobbies. And not to say that Nucleate now isn't busy, it's all-consuming actually. But I've tried to be a little bit more deliberate post-PhD about carving out that time for myself, take care of the mental health, and then the last thing is exercise. Yeah. Love to play basketball, go mountain biking, hiking, swimming, being in the gym. It's become one of the non-negotiables for me for quite a few years now, and that keeps your physical activity healthy and taken together, if your mind's healthy, your body's healthy, you can enjoy the work that you do and you can do better work. And so those things are a nice step away from work.
It's really great to have all those. And I feel like I hear a lot about scientists really liking cooking or baking. I don't know if it's because scientists are very used to following a protocol, but they also like the creative aspect of it, changing it a little bit. So I don't know, I feel like I hear that a ton.
Yeah, it's a good point. Funnily enough, and this is the opposite of how I was in lab, which was just very structured and particular about my experiments, my lab setup, the way I'd flow through my experiments. The room for variability was very low. At cooking, I'm very intuitive. I've never opened a recipe. I've learned along the way, which is very different from baking, which I'm trying to get a little bit more into nowadays. On my mom's side, we go back 2 generations in France as bakers, and so I've been trying to learn how to bake a little bit more.
Oh, it's really cool. Yeah, I feel like baking is even more precise. It's like if you go from like a cup of sugar versus 1 cup of sugar, it changes the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. Yeah.
So we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think that was a fascinating conversation, Souf.
Yeah.
It's always like a pleasure to talk to you as one of alumni of the Harvard Biotech Club. And like someone that's led so much transformation with our club, and then Nucleate as well. And it's always really great to get advice from you as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It's incredible to see the organization continue to thrive and flourish, continuing to run its programs, continuing to put together an incredible team of passionate individuals, and that's one of the things that I've talked with Peter about, and that's one of the things that's really cool to see about the Harvard Biotech Club. And it's a story that goes hand in hand with Nucleate's story. There isn't a time where I talk about Nucleate where I don't bring up HBC, and especially stepping back in. There's a new team at Nucleate. I try to bring back those examples, those learning experiences from HBC. Because like Peter said back in the day, there's no other club like it. That's why we often call ourselves the biotech club. It's not entitled, it's well justified, and you just don't see any other university biotech club just operating at the level that HBC has and continues to operate at, which is really cool and a point of pride, I think, for all of us in the organization.
Yeah, I think we kind of try to keep with the traditions and get new things, like you with Activate Bio and the Nucleate spinning out of it, and then us with this podcast, which we hope will be a big thing to add to the club and also make it more accessible, because I think only so many people go to our events, but the podcast is available for anyone, anywhere.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Hi everyone, that's the end of this episode for the Harvard Griffin GSAS Biotech Club's The Pulse Podcast. I want to thank Fung for helping co-host and produce this episode, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and please stay tuned for our next episode with Melissa McCracken, partner at Next Tech.